Simon Brette has been one of the hottest names in the world of independent watchmaking, ever since he released the Chronometre Artisans back in 2023, which won a GPHG award. I've been lucky enough to spend a good amount of time with the Chronometre Artisans, courtesy of some good friends. So today I'll be sharing my honest thoughts about the watch, the brand, as well as the person behind it. Feel free to skip to the section you'd like to hear about. Let's jump into it. So I think that the Chronometre Artisans falls into a larger category of time-only independent watches. So you can think of names like Peterman Badat, Derek Pratt, Renault Tixier, and so on and so forth. You could also compare the watch to the likes of Roger Smith and the RRCC, but in my opinion, the Chronometre Artisans is a bit different since the watch is decidedly more contemporary in design. For my personal taste, the Chronometre Artisans has a much better design than some of its competitors. So if you look at things like the Renault Tixier Monday or the Raoul Page's RP2, where you have a very nice movement but in comparison a rather plain dial, I would say the Chronometre Artisans is both stunning on the dial side as well as the movement side. On the dial side, I would say that the asymmetric sort of open work dial design is just awesome. But beyond that, I would say that the true highlight is the engraving work done by Yasmina Anti. Personally, I would say that the dial on the subscription version is one of the most beautiful watch dials I've ever seen. And also, having macroed the dial on the rose gold version, the attention to detail and the quality is just insane. On the movement side, I would say that the comparison is a bit more complex, since basically all of these high-end independent time-only watches have very impressive looking movements, and all of them are done in their individual styles. I think what stands out about the movement side of the Chronometre Artisans is just the presence of, concave angles, which lets the watch play very well with light. And when you see the movement in person, I would say that it's much more impressive than seeing it in photos. On the topic of finishing, I would say that honestly, my knowledge of watch finishing isn't to the level where I can accurately judge these watches against each other. Having talked about the topic with some other knowledgeable collectors, I've been told that at least in terms of factors like anglage, there are watches like the RRCC which are better than the Chronometre Artisans. At the end of the day, I would say that comparisons like these aren't too valuable for myself as a collector because, ultimately, as long as it looks good under a loupe or with the naked eye, which is more important, that is good enough for me. And the Chronometre Artisans, as mentioned previously, looks fantastic, again due to those concave angles. I think one of the most underappreciated parts of the Chronometre Artisans is the case and lug design. Not only is it overshadowed by the dial and movement, but I also don't think you can fully appreciate how good the case and lugs are without seeing the rose gold version. As far as dimension goes, the Chronometre Artisans comes in at 39mm in diameter and a fairly long 45mm lug to lug, which gives it a more contemporary presence on the wrist. Personally, I still think it sits well for people with larger wrists such as myself, but I would be curious how, this watch would have looked if it was marginally smaller in size and especially maybe with shorter lugs. One final topic I'll quickly touch upon is the versions of this watch that currently exist. So for those that don't know, there's a subscription version, there's a titanium version, and a rose gold version. Also, if you check out Simone's website, you'll see that there is a steel version coming out soon, and based on whispers that I've heard, it is going to be amazing. But I suppose that the main interesting part for me here is that aside from these sort of main key versions, you also have sort of these gemset piece uniques that come out from time to time. Personally, as cool as these gemset versions look, I'm not too sure how I feel about them, at least from a brand strategy standpoint, just because I feel like with these sort of independent watchmakers, it is probably better to either stick to, purely series watches or just go all in down the piece unique route. Ultimately, I do think they are very cool to look at, and as works of art, they are amazing, but I know some collectors that may not totally agree with the strategy. So the final topic that I want to talk about is Simon Brette as a brand, as well as the person behind it. Personally, I'm quite a big fan of how Simon has approached the Chronometre Artisans, where effectively he sort of assembled an all-star team to help him create the watch. But what I find very respectable is that essentially Simon has been very open and transparent when it comes to crediting who has done what with the watch. I would say that this is especially important, or at least more respectable, when you consider the current landscape of independent watchmaking, especially since, it's a world where terms like handmade or in-house are starting to be used in a very sort of arguably strange way. Another thing I think is worth pointing out is that Simon doesn't really care about the fact that his creations are trading above retail on the grey market. And in fact, he really dislikes it when his watches are flipped, even though in some ways I suppose it's good publicity for the brand. As an example, independent brands will usually share about watches of theirs that are going on auction. And if the results are good enough, they'll also repost them to celebrate the result. But I would say that the case of Simon is quite unique, whereby when the first time a Chronometre Artisans appeared on auction at Philips, he not only just didn't give it any publicity, but didn't post about it at all, even though the watch went for several times its retail. I would say that this is extremely respectable and almost a bit refreshing in the current market, especially when you consider that, when brands sort of do well and their watches go above retail, usually it sort of gets to their ego a bit. But at least in the case of Simon, this clearly hasn't affected him in the same way, where basically all of the collectors I've talked to that have met him have described him as, one of the kindest and most passionate individuals. And even though I would say the brand is very successful for what it is today, and Simon himself is extremely busy, he still takes the time to meet individual collectors and tries his best to make sure that the right people are getting his watches. Overall, the future of Simon Brette is extremely promising, and I do respect him a lot as a person. As for the watch itself, I would confidently say that the Chronometre Artisans is one of the best time-only watches I've ever seen. Overall, I don't really think it's a watch for everyone, because at the end of the day, there are collectors with different tastes, and I do think you need to be fairly deep into the side of independent watchmaking to fully appreciate this watch. But at least for me personally as a collector, if I could time travel back into the past, the first thing I would probably do is order his subscription version, and the second thing I would probably do is buy Bitcoin. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing, as the support makes a big difference. Thank you for watching, and do check out my other videos.